Have you ever felt like everything that happened in your life, even the pain and injustice, was preparing you for something much greater? Don't think you got here by accident. If you're watching this video right now, it's no coincidence. It's because there's a purpose in your story, and you need to hear what I'm going to reveal today. I know you may have been underestimated, ridiculed, or even attacked by people who had no idea how important your existence is. But what if I told you that every tear, every silent battle was being recorded, and that now is the time for everything to change in your favor? This video isn't just a message, it's a direct message to you, who carry a strength the world can't comprehend. So before I reveal the secrets that will help you understand exactly what's happening in your life, do this. Like this message now, so this message reaches more people like you. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss anything that's coming, and write the number 77 in the comments, because this is the number of the chosen ones, and if you've made it this far, it's because you're one of them. Now get ready, because what I'm about to say could completely change the way you see everything you've experienced so far. Imagine a profound silence, like that of a lion sleeping in the middle of the savannah. This silence is deceptive. It doesn't signify eternal peace, but rather a contained force waiting for the right moment to rise. When they disturb a chosen one, they aren't just poking a defenseless animal. They are awakening something that carries within itself the fury of centuries, the energy of battles fought in the invisible, and the protection of forces that never lose. Their mistake was to confuse calm with fragility, patience with submission. And the moment they provoked this force, they sealed a fate they could never reverse. The fury of a chosen one is not loud at first. It begins quietly, like a whisper understood only by the heart. But with each injustice, each attack, this whisper transforms into a roar that echoes beyond human reach. It is a roar that calls for justice, that activates invisible spiritual mechanisms and prepares a response no one can foresee. Whoever awakens this energy awakens something beyond the flesh or the mind. They awaken a divine movement. And when this fury manifests, it is not a passing storm. It is an inevitable force, one that cannot be contained by excuses or belated regrets. It is the moment when the scales are adjusted, when every tear shed becomes a thunderclap against those who dared to challenge what they did not understand. They thought they would dominate the game, but by touching the untouchable, they lit a fire they will never be able to extinguish. If this message touches your heart and you feel it speaks directly to you, consider showing your gratitude in a special way. Here on YouTube, there's the thanks feature, the heart-shaped button with a dollar sign that appears right below the video. By clicking it, you can send an amount as a form of support. And if you decide to send $100 today, you'll not only be acknowledging the value of this message, but also planting a powerful seed of gratitude and prosperity in your own life. I want you to understand, when you support this mission, you're not just helping this content continue, you're also telling the universe that you value what transforms and strengthens. So if this word has resonated with you so far, click the thanks button now, choose the amount of $100, and send it as an act of faith and connection. I'll see your name, and I'll know you're among those who not only listen, but act when they feel the call. Let's work together to keep this message alive and reach more and more people who, like you, are truly chosen. There's a saying, if you play with fire, you'll get burned. But what if that fire is lit in a world already doused in gasoline? The result isn't an ordinary flame, it's an explosion, and that's exactly what happened when they decided to test the chosen one's endurance. Approaching with impure intentions, they carried a lit match in their hands, unaware that the environment was ripe for flames. The life of a chosen one is filled with energy and purpose. It attracts attention, good and bad. Those who approach with love find light. Those who approach with envy find fire. These aggressors, driven by arrogance and ignorance, thought they could control the consequences. They didn't understand that every unkind word, every disloyal action was like pouring more fuel on an already glowing wick. Once the fire began, there was no turning back. They believed they would be mere observers of the chaos, but in the end, they became part of it. Their own hands lit the flame, and now, surrounded by the consequences, they find no escape. Because the fire they tried to direct to destroy has actually engulfed them, and now burns with relentless intensity, consuming everything they believed they had under control. For those living on the fringes of spirituality, the life of a chosen one may seem ordinary, but the reality is that their existence carries a weight that few can comprehend. This weight is not a burden, it is responsibility. It is the destiny to fulfill a purpose that was set before even their first breath. And it is precisely this weight that makes attacks against you not just personal, but spiritual. They didn't realize that by trying to hurt, they were opposing something that couldn't be stopped. They didn't understand that their presence in their lives wasn't random. It was part of a carefully crafted plot to teach, correct, or transform. By choosing to attack, they placed themselves against a divine plot, like rebellious pieces trying to fight against their own board. And the ironic thing is that this invisible weight becomes even stronger when placed under pressure. Every blow, every injustice, every trap set against you only makes you more aware of the value of your journey. While they acted without understanding the depth of what they faced, they were digging their own destiny, because touching someone with a purpose isn't just bold, it's signing your own sentence. Patience is a rare virtue, and in a world obsessed with quick reactions, it is often interpreted as weakness. That's exactly what happened. They mistook their silence for surrender, their calm for defeat. They didn't understand that the patience of a chosen one isn't born of fear, but of certainty. Certainty that things will fall into place in their own time, and that no evil force can prevent what is already written. While they plotted, you watched. While they spread poison, you stood firm. This patience made them more confident, believing they were winning. But in truth, each passing day only piled the evidence against them, strengthening their resistance and sharpening their vision. They didn't know they were sinking deeper with every step, blinded by their own haste. Patience isn't static. It works silently, builds invisible foundations, and prepares the perfect moment for a breakthrough. When that moment arrives, no defense will work. And then, everything they thought they controlled crumbles before their eyes. That's how, without raising your voice, without direct confrontation, you became living proof that true strength doesn't need to shout. It just waits and wins. In the physical world, a bounced check is a worthless piece of paper. In the spiritual world, every cruel act is exactly that. A promise that cannot be repaid, a debt that only grows. They hurled sharp words, calculated gestures, and treacherous plans as if they were coins that could be spent without cost. But the bill arrived, and there was not enough money to cover what they had done. Divine justice is unhurried, but it is relentless. It observes, records, and weighs every action, and at the right time exacts a high interest. These people thought they would escape the consequences because nothing seemed to happen immediately. But time is merely the strategy of the invisible, allowing the harvest to be proportional to the seed planted. Every humiliation they attempted to inflict, every lie told, every trap set, came back to them as an accumulated negative balance. And, like a bank account closed due to excessive debt, their own lives began to crumble. Because in the court of the Spirit, the law is simple. What you send out comes back. And those who write spiritual checks without funds end up bankrupt of peace, credibility, and a future. They thought the fight was simple, that all they had to do was undermine your morale, tarnish your name, or place obstacles in your path to ensure your downfall. But what they ignored was that by choosing to confront you, they weren't just facing an ordinary person. They were confronting a much greater force, a plan drawn up in dimensions their minds couldn't grasp. It's like an insect trying to destroy a wall. To it might seem possible, but the reality is that the wall doesn't even budge in the face of the effort. They didn't know that their lives carry a mission that doesn't depend on human recognition, but on the approval of something that is above us all. And when someone strikes a chosen one, it's not just the victim who rises. It's an entire spiritual structure that moves to rebalance what was attacked. What seemed like a strategic offensive has in fact become an act of spiritual suicide. This battle is not fought with physical weapons, but with invisible forces that operate silently and relentlessly. While they gloated, believing your silence was surrender, every step taken against you only drove them deeper into the minefield they themselves created. It is in this territory that immutable laws govern consequences, laws that do not bend to influence, status, or human power. And when these laws are triggered, there is no lawyer, no justification, no excuse that can cancel the sentence. In the end, their mistake was thinking they could measure strength against something that cannot be measured, that they could dictate the course of a story that didn't belong to them, and so every trap set for you became an abyss for them. They didn't understand that the battle wasn't between equals. It was between the finite and the infinite, between the human ego and an eternal force that knows no defeat. There's a fine line between confidence and arrogance. Confidence is anchored in solid foundations, preparation, and clarity of purpose. Arrogance, on the other hand, is born of illusion, self-deception, and the mistaken idea that nothing can touch or bring you down. They crossed this line without realizing it, and every gesture they believed to be a gesture of power was actually another step closer to the precipice. It's always like this. Before the fall, there's a phase where pride blinds, where vanity creates a false shield that prevents them from seeing the magnitude of the approaching danger. While plotting against you, they failed to notice the subtle signs that the tide was turning. Small losses, relationships falling apart, doors that were once open beginning to close. But arrogance trumped prudence. They interpreted these signs as coincidences or as something they could easily circumvent. And that's when the invisible trap began to close. Their own overconfidence caused them to underestimate the reaction, ignore the gravity of their actions, and place themselves in the most vulnerable position possible, that of someone who believes themselves to be untouchable. When the fall finally came, there was no time to react. The same self-confidence that had driven them became a weight, dragging them down. And looking back, they realized that the entire path to the bottom was paved by decisions made in the certainty that nothing could go wrong. The problem with arrogance is that it doesn't warn you when it's about to become a sentence. It just leads to the final impact. There are times when faced with injustice, you feel the urge to act, to defend yourself, to retaliate in kind. But when you're chosen, there are battles that simply aren't yours to fight. You realize that certain wars can only be won when handed over to a greater power. And that's exactly what happened. While they were intent on hurting and destroying, you remained silent, not out of inability, but because you knew this wasn't a dispute to be resolved on a human level. When God takes charge of a battle, human logic ceases to exist. What seemed impossible begins to happen, doors open or close as needed, and the scales of justice move precisely. And so, little by little, the structures they relied on began to crumble. Those who defended them began to walk away, plans that seemed infallible began to fail, and even that which they considered unshakable began to crumble before their very eyes. The most impressive thing is that while all this was happening, you didn't have to lift a finger. Your job was simply to stand firm, resist, and not give up. And in the process, it became clear to everyone that the fight had already been won long before it began. Because when a divine force takes control, there is no defeat for the protected, only for the aggressor. What they planned to be a devastating fire against you ended up becoming a process of purification. It's like gold thrown into a fire. At first glance, it seems like the flames will destroy it, but in reality, the fire only removes the impurities, leaving the metal purer and more valuable. It was the same with you. Every provocation, every humiliation, every attempt to destabilize your life was, without them realizing it, shaping a stronger, more resilient version of who you are. While they reveled in each obstacle they placed, they didn't realize the effect was the opposite of what was desired. Instead of weakening, you learned. Instead of giving up, you grew stronger. And, over time, the fire they lit ceased to be a threat and became an ally. It burned away insecurities, dependence on others' approval, and even bonds that no longer served their purpose. In the end, the hardest lesson for them was realizing that what they intended as destruction ended up being their greatest source of growth. You emerged from the fire not only intact, but shining in a way that would never have been possible without the heat of adversity. Everyone knows the story. A diamond begins as coal, dull and shapeless, until extreme pressure and intense heat transform it into the most valuable stone in the world. What they didn't understand is that by trying to crush you, by increasing the pressure on your life, they were actually contributing to your own polishing. Every lie told, every ambush set, every emotional blow wasn't enough to destroy you. On the contrary, it accelerated your transformation. The pressure revealed talents, courage, and an inner strength you may not even have known you possessed. And just as a diamond doesn't apologize for shining, you also don't need to apologize for emerging from this experience rarer, more resilient, and more precious. They, on the other hand, couldn't resist their own pressure. As you molded, they broke. As your light intensified, their masks fell. And today, the difference between you and them is clear. You've become something the world admires, while they've become examples of what happens when you try to destroy someone born to resist. Every action they took against you didn't vanish into the wind, as they might have believed. On the contrary, every unkind word, every coldly constructed lie, and every act of betrayal was recorded in the spiritual court, a place where justice isn't shaped by opinions or manipulated by human influence. There, laws are immutable, and the truth is seen without distortion. While they silently celebrated their victories, believing no one would ever know what they truly did, they were leaving a trail so clear there was no denying it. This evidence wasn't stored in physical folders or computers, but in invisible records, before an audience that sees the essence of every act, not just its surface. They didn't know that every time you endured in silence, you were strengthening the clarity of these records. Every moment you decided not to retaliate, not to stoop to their level, was like stamping the evidence against the aggressors with a seal of authenticity. In the spiritual court, time doesn't erase crimes, and the accused can't manipulate witnesses or destroy evidence. There, the very energy of each action becomes the denunciation, and the harvest inevitably presents itself. Judgment may be delayed to human eyes, but on the invisible plane, the process has been underway since the first act of injustice. And when the verdict arrives, it's not just a punctual correction. It's a turning point that rearranges all the pieces on the board. Suddenly, positions shift, masks fall, and their influence crumbles with no apparent explanation to anyone unfamiliar with the story. But you know, everything was being recorded from the beginning, and now the sentence begins to be carried out. Laughter is often used as a weapon, an attempt to diminish others, to make them seem small, fragile, ridiculous. They laughed at you. They laughed at your faith, your resilience, your ability to keep going, even when all circumstances seemed against you. But what they didn't realize is that this laughter wasn't proof of superiority, but rather of ignorance. They laughed because they didn't understand. They laughed because, upon observing your calm, they saw passivity and didn't realize they were in the presence of someone who knows the value of waiting for the right time to act. Each laugh carried the weight of an unintentional confession. I don't understand your light. The presence of a chosen one exposes insecurities many prefer to hide, and the most common reaction to what they don't understand is attack. They use laughter as a shield, believing that mocking you would protect them from the discomfort they felt when confronted with their own flaws and shadows. But their laughter was like an echo, revealing exactly what they were trying to hide. That, deep down, they knew there was something different about you, something they could neither control nor erase. Over time, the irony of this situation became clear. While they laughed, you grew. While they mocked, you grew stronger. And now, with this turn of events, their silence is the loudest testimony of all. They no longer laugh because there is nothing left to ridicule. There is only the realization that what they ignored and belittled was the very force they could never face. The light doesn't ask permission to shine, it simply exists and fulfills its function. But in doing so, it exposes everything that was previously hidden. Your presence has always been that uncomfortable light for them. You didn't need to accuse, shout, or point fingers. You simply had to be there, living according to your values and purpose, for the simple energy emanating from you to reveal the contradictions and flaws of those who tried to maintain their disguise. For those who thrive on appearances, being exposed is an unbearable threat. That's what provoked their reactions. Not because you did anything directly, but because your light made them see themselves more clearly than they wanted. This reflection was painful, and pain, when left untreated, turns to rage, so they tried to extinguish the light by attacking the lamp, not realizing that the brightness came not just from you, but from the source that sustains it. The ironic thing is that by trying to cover the light, they ended up increasing its reach. Every attempt to tarnish your name or diminish your power made more people realize the difference between you and them. And so, what should have been an effective attack became proof that no shadow can survive when the light insists on remaining lit. In human logic, silence is often interpreted as weakness, as passive acceptance of injustice. But on a spiritual level, the silence of a chosen one can be more deafening than any words. By choosing not to respond in kind to attacks, you've left room for a much more powerful voice to speak in your place. This kind of silence isn't empty. It's loaded with meaning, a conscious surrender of the battle to those who can truly win it. While they expected you to react, lose control, or beg for justice, what they saw was something different. You standing firm, looking beyond the present moment, as if you already knew the end of the story. This behavior disconcerted them because it didn't fit the expected pattern. The lack of retaliation was like a mirror held up to them, showing them that all the noise was coming from one side only, and that the other side, yours, was at peace. But the silence didn't just remain on the earthly plane. It rose like a silent clamor, activating invisible mechanisms that began to act with precision and devastation. And when the results began to appear, doors closing to them, allies withdrawing, opportunities evaporating, it became clear that this silence wasn't an absence of action, but rather proof that you had surrendered the fight to the highest possible power. Divine intervention rarely sends a message before it acts. It doesn't send notifications, schedule meetings, or give advance notice. When it arrives with force, altering scenarios in a matter of seconds. And that's exactly what happened in their case. For a long time, they thought they were in control, that they could continue their attacks without consequences. But the turnaround came like a thunderclap from a clear sky. Sudden, undeniable, and impossible to contain. The structures they had considered secure began to crumble, and nothing they tried to regain control worked. It was as if an invisible hand was permanently rearranging the board, removing the most important pieces from them. The intervention was neither partial nor timid. It was absolute. And this not only changed the course of history, but also made it clear to everyone that something larger was at work. For you, this intervention was confirmation that your patience was not in vain. It was proof that no matter how slowly things seem to move, at the right moment, everything can change in an instant. For them, it was the shock of realizing that they are not as powerful as they imagined, and that when a higher power decides to act, no human plan can stop it. The signs were everywhere, clear as the sun at noon, but they refused to see them. They weren't silent warnings, they were persistent alerts, moments that seemed like coincidences but carried weight and meaning. An opportunity suddenly lost, a relationship that ended without explanation, a disturbing dream that kept recurring. All these were warnings, attempts to show that the path they were taking led to disaster. But the blindness caused by pride and a thirst for power caused them to treat these signs as mere coincidences or passing obstacles. The problem with ignoring spiritual warnings is that they don't disappear. On the contrary, they become increasingly frequent and intense. Small frustrations evolve into major losses, and yet those overcome by arrogance insist on moving forward, believing that nothing can change the path they've chosen. That's exactly what happened. The more signs appeared, the deeper they sank into believing it was all just bad luck, failing to realize that each occurrence was a call to stop before it was too late. The result of this spiritual deafness is inevitable. When the final warning is ignored, what follows is no longer advice, but consequences. And then there's no going back, no undoing the choices. By the time they finally realized that those signs were actually opportunities to avoid the fall, they were already in free fall, and the impact was only a matter of time. Pride is treacherous. It whispers in your ear that you're right, even when all the evidence suggests otherwise. It convinces you that apologizing is a sign of weakness, that retreating is admitting defeat, and that changing course is losing. It was pride that prevented them from listening to reason. With each misstep, the inner voice, the one everyone has, even those living in darkness, tried to intervene, but was drowned out by the vanity that said, "Keep going, you're in control." This inflated vanity made them disregard even the advice of those close to them, who tried to warn them of the dangerous path they were taking. But when the heart is closed and the mind is blind, it doesn't matter who speaks. The words are received as criticism, not as care. They preferred to surround themselves with voices that fed their ego, completely ignoring any sound that might provoke reflection. And so, they followed the road they believed to lead to victory, unaware that each step was another nail in the coffin of their own opportunities. When reason is stifled by pride, failure is not only likely, it is certain. And when they finally reached the point of no return, what remained was the bitter realization that, if they had listened sooner, perhaps they wouldn't now be surrounded by the empty silence that always accompanies those who lose everything. They believed they could end your journey, that they could stifle any possibility of growth. The plan seemed simple: isolate you, erase your influence, make you disappear from people's memories. But what they didn't understand is that for those destined to flourish, the attempted burial isn't the end. It's merely the beginning of a silent and powerful process. Just as a seed is placed in the earth and seemingly disappears, you too were placed in a place of darkness and silence, but there, something much greater was germinating. The irony is that the more they tried to push you down, the deeper the soil that sheltered you grew. This depth became space to put down firm roots, to absorb strength and resilience that would not be possible under direct sunlight. In isolation, you grew silently, invisible to those who believed they had won. And while they celebrated the supposed victory of having erased your presence, you strengthened yourself for a return that would come with double the force. Once the seed broke through the earth and began to take shape, there was no stopping it. Its growth was rapid, steady, and unstoppable, and most shockingly, every attack it suffered became nourishment for its blossoming. They wanted to destroy you, but they ended up giving birth to an even stronger, more unstoppable version of you. Flowering doesn't only happen under intense light. Often, it's in the darkness that roots grow stronger, that structure is built. While they thought you were lost, sunken and defeated, you were actually in a state of preparation. And this preparation isn't visible to the naked eye, because true growth begins within, away from prying eyes and hands that might try to interfere. The unexpectedness of your blossoming was what most destabilized them. They had no containment plan to deal with your rise, because in their minds it was impossible. They were so convinced they had extinguished your light that they didn't realize it was merely being recharged. And when you emerged, it wasn't timid or hesitant. It was like an entire field blooming overnight, completely transforming the landscape. This sudden rise was a blow not only to their egos, but to the entire narrative they had constructed. Now every person who believed the lies they had told saw before them living proof that nothing could stop what was destined to happen. Flourishing was their answer, and no word or action could erase the impact of that image. Their idea was clear. Each plan should be a surefire strike, calculated to cause maximum damage. They believed they were in control, pulling the strings of the situation like expert puppeteers. But what they didn't realize is that in a universe governed by invisible laws, all energy sent out returns. It's the law of return, relentless and silent. And so each attack they prepared began to trace an invisible arc through the air, returning directly to their hands with the same intensity or even greater than that which was launched. The boomerang effect is cruel to those who never believe in it. They didn't anticipate that, when the consequences arrived, there would be no time to defend themselves. What they had prepared against you fit perfectly into their own lives, as if fate were returning the unwanted gift in exactly the same wrapping it was sent in. It's not just about justice, but about balance, and that balance, when activated, is infallible. The most painful thing for them was realizing that the return wasn't symbolic, but real. They lost opportunities just as they tried to take them from you. They suffered reputational losses, identical to those they tried to inflict. And in the end, each planned coup turned into a bitter lesson in what it means to play with forces you don't understand. When someone decides to act against what is just and sacred, they may not immediately realize the true cost of these choices. But over time, the price becomes evident, and not just on a material level. The loss of favor is silent at first, almost imperceptible, but little by little it expands, eroding connections, opportunities, and even the lifeblood of those who suffer it. They began to notice that people who were once close were drifting away, that doors that were once open were closing without explanation, and this was no mere coincidence. It was the invisible response to a set of actions that defied the spiritual order. Spiritual drought is even more cruel. It's the moment when a person, even surrounded by wealth, influence, or apparent stability, feels like nothing flows. Ideas cease to emerge, projects stop thriving, and enthusiasm disappears. It's as if the entire universe has decided to deny resources, inspiration, and protection. And this disconnection isn't easy to reverse, as simply desiring change isn't enough. It's necessary to repair the damage, undo the actions that caused the rupture, and often face a long period of internal restructuring. In their case, the loss of favor was the inevitable reflection of every step taken against you. The brilliance they once possessed, the influence they once wielded, faded until only the emptiness of those who sought to harm what was destined to prosper remained. The abundance that had eluded them now flowed toward them, like a silent and definitive transfer of blessings. They believed they were attacking someone fragile, an easy target, not realizing that behind you was a force that had never lost a battle. By challenging you, they challenged the invincible protector who guides and sustains every step of your path. This is the most dangerous act of audacity anyone can undertake, confronting a force that cannot be seen, but that manifests itself with relentless precision. It's not just a matter of faith, It's a reality that repeats itself throughout history. Whoever touches the protected touches the very wall that surrounds them and ends up crushed by the impact. Their mistake was measuring only what their eyes could see. They thought they knew their weapons, their resources, their reach. But they failed to calculate the invisible presence that acts in their favor, that transforms attacks into protection and anticipates movements to reverse traps. This presence is undeterred, and unwavering. And once provoked, it acts so broadly that there is no room for counterattack. The outcome of this challenge was predictable to anyone who understands the nature of this protection. They were hit from all sides, not by you, but by the weight of a response that doesn't forgive injustice. And in the end, they faced the truth they tried to ignore. You can't challenge the invincible and come away unscathed. At first, the fire seemed controlled, a tool they believed they could use against you to wear you down, intimidate you, and destroy you. But like any unstable element, it grew beyond their wildest imaginings. What was supposed to be a directed flame became an uncontrollable furnace, consuming not only what they intended to target, but everything around them. This transformation was no accident. It was a direct consequence of the energy they themselves set in motion. The furnace is unforgiving. It burns everything with intensity, including those who believed they could control it. The lies, manipulations, and intrigues they spread began to turn against them, creating an unbearable heat, a suffocating environment from which there was no escape. The more they tried to put it out, the more the fire fed on their own attempts, because you can't put out a fire that is linked to the very essence of the actions that started it. And so they found themselves trapped in the trap they had set. Each step toward escape only led them deeper into the heat of their own destruction. What had been lit with arrogance now burned with fury, reminding everyone that fire, once turned against the arsonist, gives no second chance. Poisoned words, toxic actions, and coldly planned traps always carry a risk, that of being ingested by the perpetrator himself. They believed they could spread this poison unaffected, as if immune to the laws that govern life. But poison is treacherous. It infiltrates, circulates, and sooner or later returns to its source. And that's what happened. Each drop of evil began to corrode not their fate, but theirs. At first, the effect was slow, almost imperceptible. Small losses, emotional distress, reputational damage. But, like all accumulated poison, it began to act irreversibly, affecting the most vital areas of their lives. It wasn't just a matter of bad luck or bad circumstances. It was the inevitable return of what they themselves had sown. The most painful thing for them was realizing that the antidote was no longer within reach. They couldn't undo what had already been done. The poison had become part of the system itself, consuming the energy, stability, and alliances they once thought unshakable. What they tried to use against you became the slowest, most relentless sentence they could imagine. Their victory was no accident. It wasn't just resistance, but the inevitable result of a balance that always holds true. From the beginning, this story had a written ending, and that ending didn't foresee their defeat. Every moment of pain was a preparation, every loss was a trade for something greater, every attack was an involuntary investment in their own ascension. The Chosen One's victory isn't just personal. It's a milestone that proves that justice, even if delayed in human eyes, arrives in its own time. It's confirmation that no one can stop the advancement of those who carry a purpose greater than life itself. This victory is far-reaching. It restores dignity, expands opportunities, strengthens faith, and even serves as a testament to all who once doubted. For them, this victory is the final proof that everything they tried to do was in vain. It's the blow that ends any possibility of regaining control, because now there's no longer a narrative to support what they preached. And for you, it's just the beginning of a new phase, not of struggle but of harvest, a chapter in which everything lost returns multiplied, and where the only possible direction is forward and upward.